"You look sad," the little girl said in flawless Egyptian Arabic. Omar froze his silver spoon hovering above untouched tea. Around them, the cheap fluorescent lights hummed plastic chairs scraping softly against the floor. No one in this place should know that language, not here, not in Detroit. He looked at her patched dress, the careful way her hands folded, and felt something crack where grief had lived for years. She smiled, innocent, unaware that she'd just spoken in the voice of the woman he buried. Omar didn't know it yet, but the poorest table in the room was about to cost him his pride and save his life. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Inside the restaurant, fluorescent lights buzzed over mismatched tables and plastic chairs. The walls displayed faded photographs of the pyramids and handwritten Arabic calligraphy. Omar chose a corner table, his designer suit drawing curious stares from the working-class diners around him. He'd eaten in palaces and Michelin-starred establishments, but something about this place reminded him of home of Egypt, of a life that felt like someone else's dream. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to Mamessa Kitchen." The voice belonged to a woman in her early 30s. Her hijab neatly pinned despite obvious exhaustion. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, but her smile held genuine warmth. "I am Amira. What can we get you tonight?" Omar studied the simple menu. Prices so low they seemed like typos compared to his usual haunts. "Just there, please. Earl Grey, if you have it." "We have Egyptian tea," Amira offered hopefully. "My mother's blend from Cairo." Something twisted in Omar's chest at the mention of Cairo. His late wife Yasmin had been from there, her laughter echoing through their mansion until that terrible night 3 years ago when drunk drivers stole her and their unborn son away. "That will be fine," he said quietly. As Amira walked away, Omar pulled out his phone, scrolling through messages about tomorrow's board meeting. 12 hours of arguing about drilling rights and profit margins, surrounded by men who saw him as a bank account rather than a human being. He'd built this empire with his father dreaming of legacy and family. Now he sat alone in a stranger's restaurant, wondering what any of it meant. "Mama, the nice man looks sad," came a small voice in perfect Arabic. Omar's head snapped up. A little girl, perhaps 7 years old, stood beside his table. Her dark curls were gathered in pink hair ties, and her brown eyes held an unusual depth for someone so young. She wore a simple dress that had been carefully mended, her small hands clasped politely in front of her. "What did you say?" Omar asked in English, certain he'd misheard. The child tilted her head, studying him with uncomfortable perceptiveness. "I said, you look sad, sir. Are you missing Soom?" But she'd spoken in Egyptian Arabic, the same dialect his wife had whispered to him during their happiest moments. "Omar, you speak Arabic?" "If of course," the girl replied, switching effortlessly between languages. "Mama," she says, "I must remember where we come from, even if we live far away now." What is your name?" Omar stared at this impossible child who spoke his mother tongue as if she'd grown up on the banks of the Nile. "I'm Omar. How old are you?" "Little one, 7 3/4, Illa announced proudly. "But Mama says I have an old soul. That means I understand grown-up feelings better than most kids." Before Omar could respond, Amira appeared with his tea, her face flushing with embarrassment. "Illa, I told you not to bother the customers. Please apologize to the gentleman." "She wasn't bothering me," Omar said quickly. "In fact, I'm impressed. Her Arabic is remarkable." Amira's expression shifted to cautious pride. "She's been speaking both languages since she was 2. Sometimes I think she understands Arabic better than English, though she was born here." Illa climbed uninvited into the chair across from Omar, ignoring her mother's sharp look. "Tell me about the sad feeling." "Uncle Omar, maybe I can help." The casual use of uncle, a term of respect in Arab culture, nearly undid him. "Why do you think I'm sad?" "Because you have the same eyes as Mama when she looks at pictures of Gideela," explained matter-of-factly. "That's my grandfather in Egypt. He died before I was born, but Mama misses him every day." Omar felt something crack inside his carefully constructed walls. This child, with her innocent directness, had seen through defenses that had fooled business rivals and world leaders. "I lost someone very important too," he admitted quietly. "Was it your mama or baba?" Illa asked gently. "My wife and our baby who was never born." Illa's face scrunched with concentration, then brightened. "In Arabic we say, 'Allah, may God have mercy on her soul.' That's what we say when people we love go to heaven." Omar's eyes filled with tears he hadn't allowed himself to shed in months. No one had spoken to him about Yasmin with such simple, accepting kindness. Even his closest advisors treated her death like a business inconvenience that had made him less focused. "Illa Habibi, come away now," Amamira said, using the Arabic endearment for my love. She looked mortified. "Sir, I'm so sorry. She doesn't understand boundaries sometimes." "Please," Omar said, wiping his eyes. "Let her stay. It's been a long time since someone spoke to me with such honesty." Amamira hesitated, then pulled out the chair beside Illa. "If you're sure, but only for a few minutes, she has homework to finish." As the three of them sat together, Omar found himself studying both mother and daughter more carefully. Despite their modest circumstances, there was something refined about Amamira's manner, a quiet dignity that spoke of better times. Her Arabic, when she occasionally slipped into it while speaking to Illa, carried the educated accent of Cairo's upper classes. "Where in Egypt are you from?" Omar asked in Arabic. Amamira's expression grew guarded. "Zamalek," she replied carefully, naming one of Cairo's most exclusive neighborhoods. Omar's eyebrows rose. Zamalek was where Egypt's elite lived, where his own family had maintained a villa before his father moved the business to Dubai. "And you came to Detroit to work in a restaurant." "Sometimes life takes unexpected turns," Amamira said quietly, her hand instinctively moving to cover Illa's. "What matters is that we're together and safe." Illa, oblivious to the undercurrents, had been drawing on her homework paper. She pushed it across to Omar with a shy smile. "This is for you. It's you, but happy instead of sad." The drawing showed a stick figure in a suit with an enormous smile surrounded by hearts and what appeared to be camels. At the top, in careful Arabic letters, she'd written, "Omar the Happy." Something broke completely inside Omar's chest. When was the last time someone had given him a gift that wasn't calculated to gain something in return? "It's beautiful." "Abibti, thank you." "Though you feel a little less sad now," Illa asked hopefully. Omar looked at this remarkable child who had somehow reached through years of grief and isolation with nothing but kindness and found himself smiling genuinely for the first time in months. "Yes, little one, I feel much less sad." As the evening wore on, other customers filtered out until Omar, Amamira, and Illa were alone in the restaurant. Amira moved efficiently between cleaning tables and helping Illa with her homework, while Omar found himself reluctant to leave this pocket of warmth and acceptance he'd stumbled into. "Mama," Illa said suddenly, looking up from her math worksheet. "Omar, he needs more practice being happy." Amira looked mortified. "Illa, you can't just invite people to dinner. Uncle Omar is a very busy, important man." But Omar surprised them both. "Actually, I'd like that very much, if you don't mind having a stranger at your table." "You're not a stranger anymore," Illa declared with 7-year-old certainty. "Your family always has dinner together." The following evening found Omar climbing the narrow stairs to Amira and Illa's small apartment above a Middle Eastern grocery store. The building was old but clean, filled with a mingled sense of cardamom, cumin, and fresh bread from the shop below. He carried bags from the city's finest delicates, though he'd been careful to choose modest portions that wouldn't overwhelm his hosts. Illa opened the door before he could knock, her face glowing with excitement. "He made you something special." Their apartment was tiny but immaculate, decorated with family photographs and Arabic calligraphy that spoke of careful preservation of culture across an ocean. Illa led him to their small dining table, where she'd set 3 places with mismatched plates and a handmade centerpiece of paper flowers. "She's been working on that all day," Amamira said, emerging from the kitchen. She changed from her work uniform into a simple dress, her hijab replaced by a colorful headscarf that complemented her olive complexion, along with practicing her Arabic penmanship to show you. Omar felt a strange flutter in his chest. No one had prepared special things for his arrival in years. His staff accommodated his needs, but this felt different. Personal, loving look. Ela thrust a sheet of paper toward him, covered in careful Arabic script. I wrote about my favorite things in both languages. Want to hear? As Ela read her list, which included Mama's Koshari Arabic cartoons and Uncle Omar's smile, Omar found himself studying the apartment more closely. Despite its modest size, something felt familiar about the way it was arranged. The photographs on the mantel showed a dignified older man, in what appeared to be academic robes, standing beside architectural monuments Omar recognized from his childhood in Cairo. "Is that your father?" he asked Amira, pointing to the photograph. This expression grew distant. "My late father, yes, Professor Ahmed Hassan al-Masri. He taught Islamic architecture at Cairo University until she trailed off, glancing meaningfully at Layla." Omar Bladrenold. Professor Ahmed Hassan al-Masri had been more than just an academic. He'd been his own father's mentor and closest friend, the man who taught Rashid al-Mansuri everything about Egyptian business culture and Islamic principles. Omar had been perhaps 12 when the professor had suffered disgrace and exile, accused of political activities against the government. "Your father was Professor al-Masri," Omar whispered. Amamira nodded stiffly. "You knew him. He taught my father everything about conducting business with honor and integrity. He was like family to us." The weight of this revelation settled over them both. Omar's father had been devastated when his mentor disappeared, had spent years trying to help the al-Masri family secretly, only to learn they'd vanished completely from Egypt. "We thought you all had died," Omar said quietly. "When the government seized your property and your father was arrested, we heard nothing more. Baba spent 2 years in prison." Amamira said, her voice barely audible. "When he was released, we had nothing left. We came to America with just our clothes and what little money friends had hidden for us." Ila, sensing the grown-up conversation had grown serious, climbed onto Omar's lap, with a casual affection of a child who had never learned to fear powerful adults. "Are you talking about Giddy Mama has lots of pictures of him being important and smart?" Omar held the little girl carefully, his mind reeling. The daughter of his father's beloved mentor, working as a waitress in Detroit, raising her brilliant child in poverty while he lived in luxury, built partly on foundations her grandfather had laid. "Amira," Omar said carefully. "Does Layla know who her father is?" "Ahmad, she knows he was American, and that he left when I told him I was pregnant. Some men aren't ready for the responsibility of family." "I want to help you," Omar said suddenly. "Both of you. It's what my father would have wanted, what your father deserved." "We don't need charity," Amir replied with quiet dignity that reminded Omar powerfully of Professor al-Masri. "We manage fine on our own." But Ila twisted in Omar's lap to face him. "Uncle Omar, what kind of help? Like helping me practice my Arabic, or helping Mama not be so tired all the time out of the mouths of babes." Omar looked at this remarkable child who cut straight to the heart of every matter and felt his purpose crystallizing. "What if I offered your mama a job, a real job, using her education and abilities?" "Amira, I don't have marketable skills. I never finished my degree in archaeology because we had to flee Egypt. You speak 4 languages, understand Islamic culture and architecture, and raised this extraordinary child while working multiple jobs. Those are exactly the skills my foundation needs." Omar had established the Al-Mansuri Cultural Foundation years ago, partly to honor his father's memory and partly to provide tax benefits for his corporation. But sitting here with Ila curled against his chest and Amamira watching him with cautious hope, he realized it could be so much more. "What would I do?" Amamira asked quietly. "Help me create programs that preserve Arab cultural heritage in American communities. Travel to universities, consult on Islamic architecture projects, develop educational materials, use your father's knowledge and your own experience to build bridges between worlds. Layla clapped her hands in delight. "Mama, you could teach other kids Arabic like you taught me, and Uncle Omar could come to dinner every night." Both adults laughed despite the emotional intensity of the moment. But as Omar looked at Amira's face, saw hope fighting with fear and pride, he knew they were balanced on the edge of something life-changing for all of them. "I need to think about it," Amira said finally. "Of course," Omar replied. "But Amira, this isn't charity, it's justice. Your family gave mine everything we needed to succeed. Let me return that gift." As the evening ended and Omar prepared to leave, Illa tugged on his jacket. "Uncle Omar, will you come back tomorrow, even if Mama says no to the job?" Omar knelt to her level, struck again by the wisdom in her young eyes. "Do you want me to back every day?" She said simply, "You make Mama smile more, and you need us to help you practice being happy." Walking to his car, Omar realized that for the first time since Yasmin's death, he was looking forward to tomorrow. Not for business meetings or profit reports, but for dinner with a 7-year-old who spoke his language and a woman who carried her father's dignity like a crown. What did you think of that connection? Let us know in the comments. 2 weeks later, Omar sat in his downtown office staring at architectural plans while his mind wandered to a small apartment above a spice shop. Amira had accepted his job offer after careful consideration and several meetings with his lawyers to ensure everything was legitimate and professional. But it was the personal connection that had transformed his daily routine. Every evening, instead of eating alone in his penthouse, he found himself climbing those narrow stairs to share simple meals and complex conversations with two remarkable women who had become the unexpected center of his world. "Mr. Al-Mansouri." His secretary's voice crackled through the intercom. "Your 4 o'clock appointment is here." Omar glanced at his calendar, frowning. He'd blocked this time to review Amira's proposal for the cultural center, but his business partner Khalil Rashid's name appeared on the schedule instead. Khalil entered without invitation, his expression dark with disapproval. At 55, he'd been Omar's father's closest business associate and had appointed himself unofficial guardian of the Al-Mansouri reputation since Rashid's death. "We need to discuss your recent behavior," Khalil said, without preamble, settling into the chair across from Omar's desk. "The board is concerned about what exactly about you spending every evening in the immigrant quarter with some Egyptian waitress and her bastard child." Omar's hands stilled on his papers. Dangerous quiet filling the room. "Careful, Khalil. You're speaking about my friends." "Friends?" Khalil scoffed. "Omar, you're a billionaire CEO. These people are gold diggers who see an opportunity. The woman probably researched your family's connection to her father and planned this entire encounter." "Amira didn't even tell me her real name for 2 weeks," Omar replied coldly. "And she works for the foundation legitimately. Her credentials are impeccable. Her credentials are a cover story." Khalil snapped, tossing a folder onto Omar's desk. "I had her investigated. Amira Hassan isn't some innocent refugee. She married an American drug dealer to get citizenship, had his child, then disappeared when he was arrested. For all we know, she's involved in his criminal activities." Omar's blood turned to ice as he opened the folder. Photographs of Amira with a white man covered in tattoos. Official documents showing a marriage license from 5 years ago. Police reports connecting her husband to drug trafficking operations. This explains why she never talks about Illa's father. Khalil continued ruthlessly. "She was married to a criminal when the child was conceived, and now she's using that little girl to manipulate your emotions and gain access to your fortune." Omar stared at the documents, his mind reeling. Amira had lied about everything. The story about an American boyfriend who'd abandoned her was fabricated. She'd been married to a drug dealer living in that world when Illa was born. "I've prepared severance papers," Khalil said, sliding another folder across the desk. "Generous enough to ensure her silence, but clear that her employment is terminated immediately. We can't have the Al-Mansouri name associated with criminals." Omar thought about Illa's innocent face, her perfect Arabic, her pure delight in simple pleasures. Had it all been an act? Had Amamira coached her daughter to target wealthy Mark's Omar? "You've been lonely since Yasmin died," Khalil said more gently. "That's understandable, but you can't let grief make you vulnerable to manipulation. This woman is dangerous." That evening, Omar drove to the apartment with the investigation folder on his passenger seat and lead in his stomach. He'd called ahead, asking Amira to put Illa to bed early because they needed to talk privately. She opened the door with a smile that died when she saw his expression. "Omar, what is wrong?" He followed her into the living room, noting details that now seemed sinister. How had a refugee afforded this apartment, modest as it was? "How did I have so many books, so many art supplies?" "We need to discuss your marriage," Omar said, without preamble. Amamira went very still. "My marriage to James Sullivan, the drug dealer you've never mentioned." The colour drained from Amamira's face. She sank onto the couch, her hands shaking. "Who told you about James? Does it matter you lied to me, Amira? About everything." "I didn't lie," she whispered. "I just didn't tell you parts of the truth I'm ashamed of." "Were you involved in his drug business?" "God, no." Amira's head snapped up, fire flashing in her eyes. "I was 19. Omar alone in a foreign country with no money and no family. James seemed kind at first. He helped me get citizenship, gave me a place to live. I didn't know what he really did until I was already pregnant." Omar wanted to believe her, but Khalil's warnings echoed in his head. "Why didn't you leave?" "Where could I go broke? He had no money, no family, no friends. And James said if I tried to leave, he'd make sure I was deported and never saw my child again. I was trapped until he was arrested." "So you've been hiding from him? Is that why you work under your maiden name?" Amamira nodded miserably. "James has friends everywhere. If they found us," she trailed off, wrapping her arms around herself protectively. Omar studied her face, seeing terror he now realized had always lurked beneath her composed surface. But doubt nodded at him. How could he tell truth from manipulation, Mama? Layla's small voice came from the hallway. She stood in her pajamas, clutching a stuffed rabbit, her eyes wide with concern. "Why are you crying?" "I'm fine," Habibi, Amamira said quickly, wiping her tears. "Go back to bed." But Illa had noticed Omar's grim expression. She patted over and climbed onto his lap with her usual confidence. "Omar did some make you sad again?" Looking into those innocent brown eyes, Omar felt his certainty crumble. If this was manipulation, it was beyond masterful. This child radiated genuine affection and trust. "I'm just confused about some things, little one," he said gently. Illa studied his face with uncomfortable perceptiveness. "Is it about my Baba? The scary one, not the one in heaven? What do you know about your scary father? He used to yell at Mama and make her cry, but she protected me from him, and now we're safe, because he's in the bad men's jail." Illa's matter-of-fact explanation held no trauma, only the simple acceptance of a child who'd been shielded from the worst of adult problems. "Illa, go to bed now," Amamira said firmly. The grown-ups need to finish talking. After Illa reluctantly returned to her room, Omar and Amamira sat in heavy silence. Finally, Omar spoke. "I want to believe you, Amira, but I've been burned by people who wanted my money before." "I never asked you for money," Amamira replied quietly. "I accepted a job I'm qualified for and work I believe in. Everything else, the dinners, the friendship, happened because Illa connected with you, or because you trained her to target wealthy men." The accusation hung between them like a blade. Amamira's face went pale, then red with fury. "Get out," she said quietly. "Amira, get out of my room. If you think I would use my daughter as bait for some con game, then you don't know me at all." Omar stood slowly, part of him wanting to stay and fight for understanding. Part of him relieved to escape the complication these women represented. At the door, he turned back. "If you're telling the truth, I'm sorry, but I have to protect myself. And I have to protect my daughter." "Amamira," replied her voice breaking, "from men who think the worst of people like us." As Omar drove away, he caught a glimpse of Illa at her bedroom window, pressing her small hand against the glass. The image would haunt him for days to come. What would you do in Omar's situation? Hit like if you think he made the right choice. For 3 days, Omar threw himself into work with desperate intensity. Board meetings, conference calls, contract negotiations, anything to avoid thinking about a small apartment where he was no longer welcome. But every evening, as he sat alone in his penthouse eating gourmet meals that tasted like cardboard, he found himself staring at Illa's drawing of Omar the Happy that he'd pinned to his refrigerator. His housekeeper, Mrs. Patterson, had been with the family for 20 years and had never hesitated to speak her mind. On the 4th evening, she found him staring morosely out his floor-to-ceiling windows at the Detroit skyline. "Mr. Omar, you look terrible," she announced, setting his untouched dinner aside. "What happened to that little girl you were always talking about? The one who made you smile again?" "It's complicated, Mrs. Patterson." "Complicated. Did she stop being 7 years old? Did her mother stop being kind? Or did someone convince you they were after your money?" Omar turned sharply. "I'll you. Because it's the same story every time you let someone get close. Your business partners whisper poison in your ear about gold diggers and ulterior motives, and you run away, rather than risk being hurt again." The truth of her words stung. This time is different. There's evidence. Dash. Evidence that a young woman made some desperate choices to survive in a foreign country. Evidence that she's trying to build a better life for her child. Mercy. Mr. Omar, your own grandmother was an illiterate Bedouin girl who married your grandfather for security. According to your logic, she was a gold digger too. Omar had never thought of his beloved grandmother in those terms. Fatima al-Mansouri had been 15 when she married his wealthy grandfather, leaving her impoverished tribe for a life of luxury. But she'd proven her worth through decades of loyalty, wisdom, and love. "Mrs. Patterson, what if I'm wrong about them? What if they really are trying to deceive me? Then you'll survive losing some money. But Mr. Omar, what if you're wrong about them in the other direction? What if you're throwing away the family you've been praying for since Miss Yasmin died?" That night, Omar lay awake, thinking about Professor al-Masri, the man who taught his father that honor mattered more than profit. Would the professor's daughter really raise her child to be a con artist? Would he have approved of Omar's suspicious nature? The next morning brought an urgent call from Khalil. "We have a problem. The Egyptian woman has been asking questions about you around the community. She say, gathering information for summiting." Omar felt his heart sink. Perhaps his suspicions had been justified after all. What kind of questions about your business practices, your charitable giving, your personal life? She's definitely planning something. "Where did you hear this?" From Ahmed at the Islamic Center. "He said she's been there every day this week, using their computers and asking lots of questions about the al-Mansouri family history." Something cold settled in Omar's stomach. If Amira was researching his background, it suggested calculation rather than innocent interest. An hour later, Omar found himself parked outside the Islamic Center, watching through the windows as Amir sat at a computer terminal with intense concentration. Illa sat beside her coloring quietly while her mother worked. Unable to resist, Omar entered the building and approached them quietly. Amira was so absorbed in her work that she didn't notice him until Illa looked up and squealed with delight. "Omar, you come back." Amira spun around her face, cycling through surprise, joy, and weariness. "Omar, what are you doing here? I could ask you the same thing," he replied, glancing meaningfully at the computer screen. Amira followed his gaze and paused as she realized what he was thinking. The screen showed detailed research about the al-Mansouri family's business empire, charitable foundations, and personal history. "This isn't what it looks like," she said quickly. "Really, because it looks like you're gathering intelligence about my family and business interests." Illa looked between the adults with growing confusion. "Mama, why do you sound angry again?" Before Amira could respond, an elderly imam approached them with a warm smile. "Sister Amira, how is your project coming along?" Omar turned to study the religious leader, noting his kind face and obvious affection for Amira and Illa. "Imam Hassan, this is Omar al-Mansouri." Amamira said stiffly. Omar, this is Imam-san. He's been helping me with my research. Ah, the young man's sister Amira speaks of so fondly. The Imam beamed at Omar. She has been working so hard on her surprise for you. Such dedication to honor your family's legacy. Omar felt confusion replacing suspicion. Surprise. Amira shot the Imam a warning look, but the damage was done. Imam Hassan continued cheerfully. The presentation about your father's work with Professor Al-Masri. Sister Amamira has been documenting their friendship and collaboration to preserve the history for your foundation's archives. Omar stared at Amamira, who was now bright red with embarrassment. You were creating a presentation about our fathers. It was supposed to be a surprise, she muttered. For your birthday next week, I wanted to show you how much your father meant to mine, how their friendship shaped both our families. Illa tugged on Omar's jacket. Mama found pictures of your Baba and my G together. They were best friends, just like you and me. Omar sank into a nearby chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his mistake. While he'd been suspecting Amir of manipulation, she'd been working to honor their shared history. I'm an idiot, he said quietly. Yes, you are. Amamira agreed with typical directness. But you're also scared, and scared people don't always think clearly. Imam Hassan looked between them with knowing eyes. Perhaps you two need to have an honest conversation. I'll take little Ila to see the new books in our children's library. After they were alone, Omar and Amamira sat in uncomfortable silence until he finally spoke. I let my business partner convince me you were using me for money. He showed me evidence about your marriage, suggested you were manipulating me through Ila. Amamira's jaw tightened, and you believed him instead of asking me directly. I've been hurt before by people who pretended to care about me for my money. It's made me paranoid. I understand being careful, Amamira said quietly. But Omar, I've been hurt too by men who promised protection and delivered control. By people who judged me for choices I made to survive when you accused me of using Layla. I know it was unforgivable. They sat quietly, both processing the damage that suspicion and fear had caused. Where do we go from here? Omar asked, finally. I don't know, Amamira admitted. Illa asks about you every day. She doesn't understand why Uncle Omar stopped coming to dinner. What do you tell her? That grown-ups sometimes have complicated feelings that take time to sort out. Omar thought about the little girl who had accepted him with unconditional love, who had taught him to be happy again through her simple presence. Amira, both yours and Illa's, but I need to know about your ex-husband. Not because I don't trust you, but because if he's dangerous, I want to help protect you both. Amamira studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. James was sentenced to 15 years. He'll be eligible for parole in 3 years. His lawyer has contacted me twice trying to arrange visits with Illa, and you refused. Of course he was violent, Omar. Not to Illa directly, but she saw him hurt me. I won't expose her to that again. What if he gets out early? What if he finds you? Fear flickered across Amira's features. Then we'll disappear again. I've been saving money just in case. Omar felt protective fury rise in his chest. This woman and child shouldn't have to live in fear, shouldn't have to plan escape routes and hide their true identities. What if you didn't have to run? What if you had protection, legal help, resources to fight him properly? Omar, I can't ask you to dash. You're not asking, I'm offering. Let me help you build a life where you don't have to be afraid. Amira's eyes filled with tears. Why would you do that after everything that's happened between us? Because Illa taught me that family isn't just about blood. It's about choosing to love and protect the people who matter to you. At that moment, Illa came running back from the library, her arms full of picture books. Omar, are you staying for dinner tonight? Mama made your favorite kashari. Omar looked at Amir, seeing hope wearing with caution in her expression. If your mama will have me, I'd love to stay for dinner. Illa cheered and threw herself into his arms, chattering excitedly about the books she'd found. Over her head, Omar met Amir's eyes and saw forgiveness there, tentative but real. One condition, Amamira said quietly. No more secrets between Stataniti. If you have doubts or concerns, you come to me directly. Agreed, Omar replied. And the same applies to you. No more handling things alone because you're too proud to ask for help. As they walked out of the Islamic Center together, Illa skipping between them and chattering about her books, Omar realized they'd crossed a threshold. Whatever came next, they would face it as a family. Subscribe for more incredible stories like this. 6 months later, Omar stood in the marble lobby of his corporate headquarters, watching as workers installed a new plaque beside the elevators. The brass nameplate read, Al-Masri Cultural Research Center, Preserving Heritage Building Bridges. It looks perfect, Uncle Omar Illa said, bouncing on her toes beside him. At 8 years old, she'd grown taller and more confident, but her essential sweetness remained unchanged. Today, she wore a new dress for the dedication ceremony, her hair adorned with a traditional Egyptian headband that matched her mother's. Your grandfather would be proud, Omar told her, kneeling to her level. This center will help preserve everything he taught about Islamic culture and architecture. Amamira approached from where she'd been directing the catering staff, looking elegant in a navy business suit that somehow managed to be both professional and respectful of her cultural values. In the months since their reconciliation, she'd thrown herself into her work with passionate dedication, earning respect from academics and community leaders across the region. The university delegation just arrived, she reported, and the mayor's office confirmed he'll be here for the ribbon cutting. Omar felt a familiar flutter of pride watching her command the situation with quiet authority. The frightened waitress he'd met a year ago had blossomed into a confident cultural advocate who spoke at conferences and consulted on major architectural projects. Any word from Cairo, Omar asked quietly. Amir's face brightened. Professor Mimoudi confirmed that Cairo University wants to partner with us on the Digital Archive project. My father's papers and research will finally be preserved for future scholars. The past months had brought many healing revelations. Through Amamira's connections with Egyptian academia, they'd learned that Professor Al-Masri's arrest had been based on fabricated charges by political rivals. His reputation had been posthumously restored, and several of his architectural theories were now being implemented in modern Islamic buildings around the world. And the legal situation, Omar asked, though he already knew the answer would be positive. James' parole was denied again, Amamira said, with visible relief. The judge cited his continued refusal to participate in anger management programs. His lawyer says they won't try again for at least 2 years. Omar felt tension he hadn't realized he was carrying finally released from his shoulders. The legal team he'd hired had built an ironclad case against any custody claims, while the private security firm ensured Air and Illa's safety without making them feel like prisoners. Omar, look, Illa called from across the lobby where she'd been examining the new cultural displays. They have the picture of you and Mama at the White House. Omar and Amamira had been invited to a cultural heritage ceremony 6 weeks ago where President had personally thanked them for their work promoting understanding between Arab and American communities. The photograph showed them flanking Illa, who had charmed the president by reciting Arabic poetry. She's going to be impossible to live with after the ceremony, Amamira said, fondly watching her daughter pose dramatically beside the display. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about that. Omar said, his voice suddenly nervous in a way that made Amira turn to study his face. About Layla being dramatic about living arrangements. Before Amamira could respond, Khalil Rashid appeared at Omar's shoulder. Despite their conflicts over Amamira, the business partner had gradually come to respect her work and dedication, though he still maintained professional skepticism about mixing personal and business relationships. Omar, the board members are arriving for the pre-ceremony meeting, Khalil announced. We need to review the foundation's expansion budget. 5 minutes, Omar replied curtly, then turned back to Amira. Can we talk privately after the ceremony? It's important. Amamira nodded, though concern flickered across her features. Of course. The dedication ceremony exceeded even Omar's ambitious expectations. The mayor spoke eloquently about the importance of preserving cultural heritage in America's melting pot cities. The university representatives announced their partnership with enthusiasm that bordered on reverence for Professor Al-Masri's legacy. Community leaders from every ethnic enclave in Detroit attended, creating a living testament to the Sense mission of building bridges between cultures. But the highlight came when Ila was invited to cut the ribbon alongside Omar and Amira. As photographers capture the moment, she looked up at the adults flanking her and announced clearly into the microphone. May would be so proud that his ideas are helping people learn about each other instead of being afraid of each other. The applause was thunderous, but Omar barely heard it. He was too busy watching Amamira's face, seeing the joy and pride there, wondering if he was about to risk everything they'd built together. 2 hours later, after the last guest had departed and Illa had been collected by Mrs. Patterson for a promised sleepover at Omar's penthouse, he and Amira found themselves alone in his office. "You've been nervous all day," Amira observed, settling into the chair across from his desk. "What is it you—" Omar opened his desk drawer and withdrew a small velvet box, then immediately put it back again. "Amira, this past year has been the happiest of my life since Yasmin died. For me too," she said softly. "Illa has become the daughter I thought I'd never have. And you." He paused, struggling for words. "You've become my closest friend, my partner in everything that matters, the person I think about first when I wake up and last before I sleep." Amamira's breath caught her eyes widening as she began to understand where this conversation was heading. "I know we've never discussed our relationship in romantic terms," Omar continued. "We've been so focused on friendship and family and working through our individual traumas, but Amamira, I am in love with you completely, desperately, forever. In love with you." Tears began streaming down Amira's face, though, whether from joy or distress, Omar couldn't tell. "I want to marry you," he said, pulling out the velvet box again and opening it to reveal a ring that somehow managed to be both magnificent and tasteful. "Not because it would be convenient or practical, but because I can't imagine a future without you and Illa in it permanently." Amamira stared at the ring, a perfect sapphire surrounded by diamonds, clearly chosen to complement her eyes and values rather than simply display wealth. "Omar," she whispered, "I love you too, more than I thought I could ever love anyone again." "But," he prompted, hearing hesitation in her voice, "but marriage is complicated for people like us. You're not just a man. You're a public figure. Your wife would be scrutinized constantly. And I'm not just a woman. I'm a divorced single mother with a controversial past. None of that matters to me. It matters to your business partners, your social circle, your cultural community. A divorced Egyptian immigrant with a child by an American criminal is not exactly the ideal wife for an Arab billionaire." Omar leaned forward intently. "Amamira, do you remember what your father taught mine about conducting business with honor?" She nodded, confused by the change of subject. "He said that a man's worth is measured not by his wealth or status, but by how he treats the most vulnerable people in his sphere of influence. You and Illa were vulnerable when I found you, helping you, protecting you, loving you. That's not a liability to my reputation. It's the best thing I've ever done. What about your board? Your investors? They already questioned your judgment about hiring me. Then they can question it about marrying you too. Amamira. I spent decades building an empire to impress people who don't actually care about me. I'm not going to sacrifice the love of my life to maintain their approval." Amira stood and moved to the window, looking out at the Detroit skyline. "What would this marriage look like? I won't be a trophy wife who sits quietly at charity events. I have work I believe in, goals I want to achieve. I would never ask you to give up your work. In fact, I want to expand it. I want to fund cultural centers in 10 cities, create scholarship programs for immigrant children, build the kind of legacy your father dreamed of. And Layla, I want to adopt her, legally give her my name, make sure she never questions her place in our family." Amamira turned back to face him, her expression cycling through a dozen emotions. "Omar, are you sure? Once we do this, there's no going back. You'll be committed to a ready-made family with all our complications and baggage." Omar stood and moved to join her at the window, taking her hands in his. "Amamira, I've been existing for 3 years with you and Illa. I'm finally living again. That's not baggage. That's blessing. For a long moment they stood together in silence, the weight of the decision hanging between them. Yes, Amira whispered finally. Yes, Ilio. Omar slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, then pulled her into a kiss that tasted like tears and hope and the promise of forever. When they broke apart, Amira was laughing through her tears. How are we going to tell Layla? Are you kidding? She's been planning our wedding since the night we met. I'm pretty sure she has a dress picked out already. As if summoned by their conversation, Omar's phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Patterson. Little Miss wants to know if she can call you Baba after the grown-ups stop being silly and get married. She says she's tired of waiting for you to figure out you belong together. Both adults burst into laughter, their nervous tension dissolving into joy. Did you see this coming? Let us know in the comments. 2 years later, Omar stood in the garden of their new home. Not his sterile penthouse, but a warm lived-in house in Detroit's cultural district, where Arabic mixed with English in the hallways and the scent of Amira's cooking permanently perfumed the air. He was watching Illa now, 10 and even more brilliant and compassionate than before, as she taught a group of refugee children basic English phrases. The Al-Mansouri Foundation's after-school program had grown to serve 300 children, weekly offering language instruction homework help and cultural preservation classes. She's a natural teacher, Amira said, appearing beside him with 2 cups of tea. Marriage had only enhanced her confidence and grace. She now spoke regularly at international conferences and had been appointed to the President's Advisory Council on Cultural Integration. Just like her mother, Omar replied, accepting the tea gratefully. How was the call with the UN? They approved our proposal for the Global Refugee Education Initiative. Full funding for 5 years implementation, starting this fall. Omar felt the familiar surge of pride and amazement that his wife's vision and expertise were being recognized on the world stage. That's incredible, Habibi. It means we'll be traveling more, Amira said carefully. 3-month assignments in different countries working directly with refugee communities. Are you prepared for that? As long as we go together, I'm prepared for anything. They stood in comfortable silence, watching Illa correct one child's pronunciation with infinite patience, while encouraging another shy attempts at conversation. Any regrets? Amira asked quietly. Omar considered the question seriously. His marriage to Amira had cost him some business relationships and social connections. Certain traditional elements within the Arab American community had never fully accepted their unconventional love story. His net worth had actually decreased as he'd redirected more resources toward charitable work. But happiness wasn't measured in dollars or social approval. None, he said firmly. You only that we wasted so much time being afraid of our feelings. Mama Illa called from across the garden. They walked over to admire the artwork of a 7-year-old Syrian refugee whose family had arrived just months ago. The drawing showed a house with stick figures standing in front. 2 adults and 3 children all holding hands. She says it's her family in America, Illa explained proudly. Her mama, her baba, her little brother, and the 2 kids her parents want to adopt from the orphanage. Omar's throat tightened as he recognized the hope in the child's crayon masterpiece. This was what their work was really about. Not just preserving culture or teaching language, but rebuilding families and dreams that war and displacement had shattered. That evening, after the children had gone home and Illa was settled with her homework, Omar and Amira sat in their living room planning the next day's activities. The domestic routine felt miraculous to someone who had once eaten every meal alone. Baba, Illa said, appearing in the doorway in her pajamas. She'd started calling him that immediately after the wedding, as if she'd been waiting her whole life to have a father worthy of the title. What is it, princess? I was thinking about Yasmin today, the little girl from Syria, not your first wife. She clarified with a matter-of-fact directness that always amused him. She misses her old home, but she's excited about her new family. That's good, Habibi. Change can be scary, but it can also bring wonderful things. That's what I thought too. And Baba, I want to ask you something important. Omar and Amira exchanged glance. Layla's serious tone suggested this wasn't a request for a later bedtime or extra dessert. What is it, sweetheart? I know you and Mama love each other and love me, but sometimes I think maybe our family could be even bigger. Omar's heart skipped. What do you mean? There are so many children who need families, and we have so much love and space and happiness. Maybe we could adopt a brother or sister for me. Amira reached over and took Omar's hand, squeezing gently. They discussed this possibility privately, but hadn't wanted to pressure their relationship with additional changes too quickly. That's a very mature suggestion, Amira said carefully. But adoption is a big decision that affects everyone in the family. I know. That's why I wanted to ask both of you together. And Baba, I've been learning about something called family legacy. Where did you learn about that in my social studies class? We're studying how families pass down values and traditions through generations. I know you lost your first family and Mama and I didn't have a complete family before, but now we do. Omar felt tears threatening as he listened to his 10-year-old daughter articulate concepts that adults struggled with. And I think Illa continued, our legacy should be about making families for children who don't have them, just like you made a family for me and Mama. That night, after Illa had gone to bed, Omar and Amira talked until dawn about expanding their family through adoption. By morning, they decided that their daughter's wisdom should guide their next chapter. 6 months later, they welcomed 8-year-old Ahmed, a Palestinian refugee who'd lost his parents in a bombing, and 5-year-old Nora, a Lebanese girl whose family had been killed in a car accident. The house that had once seemed too large for 3 people now buzzed with activity, laughter, and the beautiful chaos of a truly multicultural family. Omar often found himself standing in doorways, watching his children, biological, adopted, and chosen, as they helped each other with homework in 3 different languages, shared stories from 4 different countries, and created new traditions that honored their diverse backgrounds while building something entirely their own. The little girl who had saved his life by speaking Arabic in a Detroit diner had taught him the most important lesson of all. Family wasn't about genetics or geography or social status. It was about choosing to love each other through every challenge and celebration, creating belonging where none had existed before. As Omar tucked Ahmed and Nora into bed one evening, listening to Illa read them a bedtime story in Arabic, while Amira sang a lullaby their own grandmother might have hummed, he realized his journey was complete. He'd started as a lonely billionaire eating dinner in the wrong restaurant on the wrong night. He'd become a father, husband, and guardian of children who needed love more than they needed wealth. Sometimes the most incredible transformations began with the smallest acts of courage, like a 7-year-old girl brave enough to speak to a sad stranger in his mother tongue, offering comfort when she had every reason to stay silent. Love really did speak every language, and sometimes it spoke loudest in the voices of children wise enough to build bridges where adults had only seen walls. Omar's empire had made him rich, but this family chosen, blended and bound by love rather than law, had made him wealthy beyond measure. The little girl who once asked if he wanted to be happy had given him something far more valuable, the chance to make others happy too. And in Arabic, English, and the universal language of love, their story would continue for generations to come. Their house in Detroit became known throughout the community as a place where broken families could heal and new traditions could flourish. And every evening at dinner, Omar looked around their table and remembered the night a child's voice had called him back to life. Sometimes the greatest investments weren't in oil fields or stock portfolios. Sometimes they were in the radical act of opening your heart to people who needed shelter there. Subscribe for more incredible stories about the power of family and love conquering all boundaries.